Hey, in this video, I just want to talk about the books I read for 2024, give a little breakdown. Maybe someone would be interested in reading those books, and then I'll talk about my book selection list for 2025. Yeah, let's get right into it. So for 2024, I didn't read that many books. Let me look at my list. I read 14 books, and I gave an average rating of 3.79. Kind of high if you assume that the average should be 3 out of 5. But I think generally the books I choose are pretty good. I only read books that are recommended to me from other people, so I assume they should be good at some level. Um, Perhaps my best book, or I'll just talk about what books I read in order. So I think early on in the year, I read a lot of more help books, self-help books. So if you begin with The Alchemist, I gave that a rating of a 1. I read it in January. And then one day later, I read Atomic Habits. I gave it a 3. I read it multiple times. I don't think it's that helpful. The whole book can be summarized in 2 sentences essentially. So I don't think it's worth reading the book. That's why I gave it a 3. So I read that also in January. Um, then a week passed, and I wanted to reread one of my favorite fiction books of all time. And so I read the Knife of. It's basically like the Chaos trilogy. So it's the Knife of Never Letting Go, the Ask and the Answer, and Monsters of Men. And I gave it a 5, 4, and 4. And I read that all in 1 week from January 20th to January 24th. The fiction is pretty good. I would recommend reading it. I read it a couple years ago. I think in 7th grade or maybe 6th grade, and I thought it was the best fiction book I've ever read. So I just want to reread it again. I thought the series were not as good when I read it the second time, but it's still good enough to want to read, and so I would highly recommend people to read it. It's basically some sci-fi book, and it's that people men cannot, they can talk, and their thoughts are unfiltered, and so everyone can hear them. But women do not, they have quiet thoughts like what we live right now. For example, let's say I'm with my roommates, I can hear every single thought they think about, even if they don't say it. um, it's a good summary. So it talks about trust and hiding secrets and stuff like that. I thought it was a really good book, and it talks a lot about power and betrayal and stuff. I thought it was a great book. um, then from my writing seminar class, I had to read When McKinsey Comes to Town. I gave it a 3. I thought there's a lot of great case studies, but it kind of got boring. It's just the same thing over and over again. I think that book really made me hate consulting. I think nowadays, now when I think about consultants, I think they're generally not that smart people. They're just people who want to make money, but they don't really want to do anything with their lives, and so they can go screw over a lot of industries. Um, yeah, sure, they make some industries more money, but in a lot of cases, they also fuck with basically safety of people, and they indirectly killed probably hundreds of people, just from the examples I read. And so I really did not my perception on consultants have greatly diminished from reading that book. Um, so yeah, I have very little respect for consultants nowadays, from reading that book. I give it a 3. It's an average book. Gave me a new perspective on the consulting industry and the dark sides of it. Obviously, there's some good sides, but I don't think it changes your life or anything. It's just some passive knowledge. Oh, I don't really like this industry. So it's okay. It's an alright book. And then I didn't really read that many books from then on. So March, I read The Chip War. That was when I was starting to get into the semis industry. So I want to basically get a better feel for how chips are made and just a general history on chip manufacturing. This book comes really, really recommended by basically everyone in the industry. So I read it. And this one was a 5. It was a great book. The industry analysis was really, really great. It talks about the history of a lot of the technologies that we take granted for today. I think what some people don't realize is chips are everywhere in society, and we may not think of them. We think iPhones and computers, but what about microwaves or dishwashers or washing machines? They're all chips. Elevators as well. Escalators perhaps are some example of chips. So they're really, really ubiquitous, and I don't think a lot of us thinks about these kind of stuff. And so it gave me a whole new perspective on the supply chain and the geopolitical tensions all around this kind of chip industry. And if you want to understand geopolitics right now, I think the best book you should get into is on chips, because all of the policies we have right now are solely focused on energy and chips, and that's kind of interesting thing about. Um, After that, I did not really read that many books. I started getting into entrepreneurship again, so startup books. So I read 0 to 1, which is by Peter Thiel, the co-founder of I think PayPal, and co-founder of 5 other companies and runs the most prestigious venture capital firm right now. It's an okay book. It's like really optimistic. It says, people who build stuff, like we should have more people that build stuff instead of people who like do nothing. Like no offense, like lawyers essentially. Yeah. Then the Almanack of Naval Ravikant, he's like this really great thinker, and so a lot of people respect him. So he, like, it's not really true, but he wrote a biography of himself, autobiography, and so it's just his thoughts on the world, and it was pretty insightful, I would say. So I gave it a 4. I don't think it changes you a lot. It just gives you some new perspectives on like what to think about. So I thought that's pretty good. It's not a bad book by any means. Maybe you should take caution because he's super optimistic about everything, about like how life works. Then later on towards the end of the year, starting in my last book of June, and the last book I read for over like 6 months is Skunk Works. So this one is about Lockheed and the defense industry. I really like, there's one division in Lockheed, so it's called Skunk Works. It's like this mini division within the company which works on hyper like futuristic technologies. And it was the autobiography of the guy who ran the entire industry. And honestly, there's a lot of insights from it. Some of the insights, like off the top of my head, since I'm not looking in the notes I wrote for that book, was that like they hate bureaucracy. They think bureaucracy is just inefficient, and says they cite that within the like military / procurement industry and DoD and whatnot, there's a guy who has to read like a couple thousand pages each day because it's mandated by the government to have reports. And so realistically, do you think like someone's gonna read 1,000 pages a day? All it does is slows down the system. And they talk about how they structured Skunk Works, which is that special division all around avoiding this kind of bureaucracy. Then how they manage the engineers was they put all the engineers together. And so the engineers will at all time know what's happening within that division. And like you may think it's kind of bullshit, but they built the best planes in the world. Like this guy won 2 awards for building planes. Like the most prestigious awards. I think they're like better than Nobel Prizes for plane builders. And he got 2 of them within his life, which is kind of insane. So he built the fastest plane ever possible, and which is the record is still withholding. So fastest plane ever built, and the stealth plane that basically has never been shot. I think it got shot down once over Iraq or Serbia. It got shot down over Serbia. So that's what's that plane? F117A Nighthawk, and then he built the U-2, which is a spy plane. He built the SR-71 Blackbird, so the fastest plane. He built a lot of like crazy planes. I think he might also have built the NASA X, something like the autonomous vehicle, which is unofficially the fastest non-manned airplane ever. And it's just a great perspective on how to do things, how to do like the impossible. I gave that a 5. I think it was actually a really funny biography as well. Like this guy has a great sense of humor. I actually teared up when he talked about how his boss died, and it was a great book. It was a really good book. I would recommend that book to almost anybody, even if you're not interested in the military. Then no books read from June to December. I would say it's because of school, but not really. I could have read more. I read like multiple books at the same time, so I don't really finish a lot of them until I pour a lot of time into it. And so for December break, I read 4 books within 3 days. So I read the Nvidia Way, the ASML Way. I mean, these are both like semiconductor companies. Clear Thinking and Good Strategy and Bad Strategy. Nvidia Way and ASML, the ASML Way were great books. They're both 4s. If you really like the history of Nvidia and how to run like a good company, you should read Nvidia Way. I thought it was excellent. It talks about like some decisions that Jensen Huang made, the CEO of Nvidia, and like, you read it and you're kind of shocked on how many times they died and like why they do certain things. Same thing with the ASML Way. A lot of different takes on how this European company went from basically nothing to dominating the entire industry. In fact, they're the only monopoly in the world, like true monopoly in the world. They have 0 competitors, and I think that's quite insane to think about. And also, when I read those 2 books in order, and then I read Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, it made me realize that like a lot of these great companies right now, ASML and Nvidia, are doing really, really well. It's because of a focus on long-term strategy over short-term like profits. I think short-term profits are usually pushed upon by these Wall Street analysts and these consultants who don't really know what they're doing. In fact, in both books, they both explicitly mentioned that because these Wall Street analysts wanted to raise up stock price, they told them to do like things that they both disagreed on. And they said no, they said, fuck you, you guys are stupid. They went ahead and did their own stuff, and now they're the most valuable companies in the world. Literally, Nvidia is number one, and ASML is probably like top 50. Even let's say if ASML goes like bankrupt or they get like bombed or something, the entire world will shut down. So it really shows how important they are, which I think is kind of crazy to think about. So I give them both a 4. They're great reads. Good strategy, bad strategy, also a 4. It talks about how to make a long-term strategy. Also talks about like how to think through strategies and how to like find leverage and stuff like that. It's a good read. I think the guy who wrote the book is a UCLA professor or UC Berkeley professor, and he glazes himself like way too much. He says like, oh my, like these guys, they wanted to hire me as a consultant, and I gave them advice, and then they rejected my advice. Like 2 years later, they're all dead. Like the company's dead, and I think they're really stupid. I think he cherry picks examples way too much, but some of the examples he gives are really, really good, and it's still an okay book. You have to just take it with a grain of salt that this guy probably is hyping himself way too much. And then finally, clear thinking. It just gives you like, it just talks about like how you should think through stuff. It's okay. It's like some generic advice. I give it a 3. I don't think it's worth reading. Yeah, probably not worth your time. A lot of people really like it. I don't think it was that good. And now for some books that I'm reading in 2025. I am reading, I think, 7 books at the same time. One of them is Boom, Bubbles and the End of Stagnation. That is a really complicated book. It talks about financial markets and how like national policy and international policy affects boom cycles, bubbles, and why they burst, and how that is associated with technology and stuff like that. I think it's a really unique take. It's probably one of the best books right now. Like I see a lot of reviews on it recently. I think it just got written maybe like 2 months ago, maybe. I think I'm only like maybe 20% in. I think it's already a 4 or 5. There's so many, like, there's a wealth of information there I would like never think about. It's probably like a better education than the stuff you would get from Wharton on the finance side. So yeah, it's a great book. 48 Laws of Power. I read this already. I just want to like reread it again. I don't think it's that particularly good. It's just there's some stuff you want to keep in mind. I think like some people avoid reading books on power because they think it's like dark, I would say. But I guess my only answer is no one can escape playing the game. So you might as well get good at playing the game. Even those who are, maybe even people who don't consider themselves playing a game of power and not concerned with gaining status / power / leverage, are really the ones who are the most powerful, right? Like if you don't care about status gains or whatever, like Elon Musk, like I think he's objectively like really powerful. He's in the government. He's, I think, the richest guy in the world. And he says whatever he wants on Twitter. And people are like, oh, you know, you run these companies. Shouldn't you be worried about what you say on Twitter? He's like, no, like I don't care what people think. Which I think is like a sign of power. So I think it's a good read. Maybe just to review some of the stuff that Robert Greene talks about. And then another book is Thinking Fast and Slow. So like there's so I usually read stuff in buckets. So you can tell there's a self-help bucket, and then there's a semiconductor bucket that I've been reading stuff on. And this belongs in the better thinking bucket. So I read Clear Thinking, Thinking Fast and Slow. Still like only 5% in, so I'm not sure how I'll review it. But I'm also reading or going to read Thinking in Systems. And so they're all part of my thinking bucket list, essentially. Hyperion, which is a fiction book that comes highly recommended from one of my friends. It's on science fiction. It's really complicated. I don't really understand a lot of it, so there's no rating yet. I would say it's a tentative 3. It's about, I'm actually not sure what it's about. There's like some religion, there's some like science fiction stuff. I'm actually really surprised by the depth of like sci-fi type technology that the author incorporates in the book. And then another self-help book, Ultralearning. I read this before, just want to review it again, so I'm reading it again. Based on previous readings, it's probably a 4. I think it's okay. Then Venture Deals, which is more about the VC industry, particularly if I want to work in it soon. Since I'm working in it, basically, I should probably get a better sense of what goes on in that industry. I wouldn't recommend it if you're not interested. So like 2 or 3 if you're not interested, and then if you're interested in the industry, then probably a 5. And then finally, book that comes highly recommended from one of my friends is The Courage to Be Disliked. So these are the books I'm reading right now. I haven't started that book, but I've downloaded it. And then I have like a bigger list that I haven't read, but I want to read in the like within the year probably. I'm not sure if I can get through this entire list. I have like 140 books, but stuff like common stocks and uncommon profits on the finance industry, designing games, a guide to engineering experiences sounds interesting. A lot of business books like Don't Make Me Think and Don't Think of an Elephant. Opioid crisis that I'm slowly starting to get interested in. So Empire of Pain. Then some biology books like Entangled Life, How Fungi Makes Our Worlds. Um, the financial, like the birth of high frequency trading industry, that's in Flash Boys. And then games people play, how Iceland changed the world, because Iceland seems to be like this really productive company, not company, country that produces a lot of productive companies. How the world really works, how to invest. Shoe Dog comes really recommended. Range, Radical Candor. Talent by Tyler Cohen. Surfaces and Essences, The Avoidable War, The Beginning of Infinity. These are like pretty good books. The Man Who Knew Infinity, The Man Who Knew the Future, and The Maniac. I think these are all 3 books based on John von Neumann. I'm pretty sure that's his name. So he invented the computer architecture. That's pretty interesting to me. So that's on my to-read list. And a couple of fiction books, but I'm not like super into fiction, so I don't really have a substantial list. I heard that When Breath Becomes Air is a really, really good book. So that's one of the fiction books that is on my list. Hopefully, like this year I read 14 books. One of my mentors is my mentor. I think this year he read like 50. And so I don't think I can get up to that kind of level, but I do want to read maybe 25 books. So 2 books a month. That's not hard to do, considering that I could read like 5 books in 3-4 days. So it's definitely possible. So yeah, I'm gonna set 25 books for this year, and hopefully I can publish a review for each book that I have. All the quotes that I highlight on the books are available that I have on my notes. So yeah. Oh, I almost lost. So yeah, that's my books that I read for 2024, and the books I want to read for 2025.